The off-season bus to Barra de Valizas was mostly empty. A dozing couple, a boy playing on a phone, and our group of 4 with backpacks that smelled like wet wool. Winter in Uruguay makes the Atlantic look iron and old, but Camila wanted to see Cabo Polonio when it wasn't clogged with tourists. No roads, no cars, just dunes and the lighthouse, she said, passing the mate gourd down the aisle. The driver's radio crackled with a weather warning. Pampero winds ripping north, coastal flooding possible by nightfall, and he shot us a look in the mirror that said, "You still going?" At the terminal, the wind smacked the kiosk's plastic curtains. A woman sold us warm biscocos from a fog display case and told us the 4x4 trucks that ferry people across the protected dunes had stopped running. Too much surge. "If you go, it's on foot, chicos," she warned, tapping a laminated Parque Nacional sign. Her fingers left crescents of condensation. Diego smiled, the way he does when someone suggests we can't do a thing. 8 kilometers on sand. We'll make it. We set out under a pewter sky, the sand squeaking, sea birds like paper cutouts against the wind. Poles marked the safe path, some painted with fading numbers, others carved with initials. L and AMP, M 2019, a fish, a single star. We followed them east, rising and sliding, our shoes filling with grit. The ocean revealed itself in flashes, a strip of froth, a darker line, then gone again behind the yellow hills. The air smelled of kelp and rust. By the time the lighthouse appeared, white column, rusted gallery, glass eye, the first needles of rain were stitching the afternoon together. Cabo Polonio crouched at its base like a cluster of low stones. Shacks painted turquoise or peeling brown leaned into each other, doors tied with rope. A dog watched from a doorway, hackles up. There was no generator's hum. The place felt held under a breath. We found a posada with a hand-painted sign, El Aurora, and pulled the chain on a bell that didn't ring. An old man with a wool cap emerged from behind a beaded curtain. He introduced himself as Pedro, asked for cash in advance, then for us to stamp our feet. His hands were furrowed like a dried riverbed. "The storm comes fast here," he said, glancing toward the lighthouse. "People think the point is solid, but the dunes move." The room was simple. 4 bunks, a stove with a blue flame, a shelf of paperbacks gone soft from salt. Camila cracked a small window. Wind shoved back. Diego found a cracked shell laid across the threshold, grinning like we'd been given a key. Mateo rolled his neck and said he'd go climb the lighthouse before dark. "Not today," Pedro said, too quickly. "Closed for storms. Stairs get slick. And there are people who come when the weather hides them." The beads clicked behind him like teeth. He told a story without telling it. Fishermen missing, sea lions barking toward land, a light seen inland where there is no electricity. We laughed lightly, because that's what people do to keep from fraying. We ate noodles with canned tomato, the steam beading on the window. Outside, the wind ratcheted higher, and the lighthouse lens turned once, twice, like a slow, sleepless eye. When we finally lay down, the dog from the doorway howled. It sounded like a drawn wire, a warning stretched thin across the rain. The morning was the color of spoil. Wind had combed the sand into new ridges that cut the village at steep angles, and the sea roared in sheets. The dog from last night lay beneath our windowsill, tail thudding against the plank when we stirred. Camila named him Nato for his squashed nose and fed him a corner of bread. "He can be our guide," she joked. Pedro, overhearing, only frowned. The lighthouse was closed, as promised, a chain strung through its corroded iron gate. We walked the rocks anyway, staying low, avoiding the slick algae. On the far side of the point, sea lions crowded the ledges, their bodies heaving like wet sacks. A few raised their faces and barked toward the dunes instead of the sea. "Weird," Mateo said. Like they're answering a sound we can't hear. I cupped my hand to my ear and caught something carried by the wind. A thin, fluted tone, like a whistle played behind a door. Back in the village, Camila stayed to sketch the lighthouse, hunched over her pad, while Diego and I followed the poles back into the dunes to stretch our legs. The sand was crisscrossed by boot prints, some sharp, some softened by the night's rain. I stopped at a line of symbols drawn with a stick, a circle with 3 strokes, a square bisected by a slash, a set of dots like an ellipsis. Kids, I guessed. Diego shrugged. Or bored fishermen. We found a half-buried crate wedged against a tuft of grass. The wood was stamped with Portuguese writing and the logo of a bulk food company I'd seen in Montevideo. Inside, nothing but black sand and a rag smelling faintly of diesel. Diego made a face. "Litter," he said, but his tone had changed. The poles ahead bent away from the village, toward a low swale. We followed them out of habit and came upon another set of marks. The same symbols, repeated, and a clean heel print on top. Whoever made them had been here after the rain stopped. When we returned, Pedro was stacking driftwood in the common room. He didn't look up when we told him about the crate. "Currents carry junk from everywhere," he said. "From Rio Grande do Sul, from ships. People see patterns when there is only water." He handed us a chipped thermos of hot water. "Please stay close today. If it floods, the paths vanish." We promised to behave. Then the radio on the shelf, which I had assumed was for show, crackled with a voice flattened by static. I caught Prefectura and Desplazamiento and Verificar Lucis. Then it died. Pedro turned the knob with 2 careful fingers, but the voice didn't return. "Candom drums," Diego said lightly, trying to unknot the room. That's what it sounded like. Pedro did not smile. That afternoon the thin whistle returned. This time it came from inland, a drawn-out note that rose and fell, never quite resolving. NATO pricked his ears, then stood and trotted toward the dunes with purpose. Camila started after him. "Don't," Pedro snapped, then softened. "Not today." He seemed to choose between telling us more and not. He chose not. Night fell early. We cooked rice with sardines, ate in our jackets. The whistle didn't stop. Twice, the lighthouse's beam caught something pale moving along the inland ridge. Fabric, maybe, or a gull lifted by gusts. When the wind hit the posada just right, the beaded curtain knocked like hesitant knuckles. The tide came higher than Pedro liked. By mid-morning, one of the side alleys was a shallow canal, and we crossed it with rolled pants and squeals, which embarrassed me even as I made them. The sky was a lid. Camila sketched the flood line on the door frame in pencil. "A document," she said, while Diego and Mateo argued about whether the whistle could be a pipe rebar bending in the wind. "It changes pitch," Mateo said, "like someone moving." "So does a flagpole," Diego replied. We waited for the trucks that never came, for the weather window that didn't open. Around noon, the radio woke again. This time the voice was clearer, a man who said he was Prefectura Naval Uruguaya, asking any Polonio residents to confirm there were no lights inland at night. Repeat, confirm no lights inland. Suspected signalization irregular. Pedro stared at the speaker like it might bite him, then reached and turned the knob to 0. "Old batteries," he said to no one, and let the room go quiet. After lunch, the whistle sharpened. NATO whined at the threshold until Camila clipped a rope around his neck like a leash and let him lead. Pedro set his jaw but didn't stop us. "Stay where you can see the lighthouse," he said. We walked the first ridge, then the second. The whistle grew into something like speech, a breathy syllable that slid across the dunes and was lost. At a hollow between hills, We found a pattern stamped into the damp sand. Circles with 3 strokes, the bisected square, dots in a row. Between the symbols lay a coil of nylon rope, clean and new. Signals, Matteo murmured. For whom? The dog paced the pattern, then pulled east. We followed into the swale and discovered the remains of a camp. Footprints, crumpled foil packets of yerba, a smudge where a fire had tried to be. Another crate lay broken, and a torn plastic poncho snapped in the wind. Diego crouched by a heel print that showed the tread of a running shoe. "Not fishermen," he said. Back at the village, Pedro pretended not to see the rope. He poured us more hot water and asked if we'd like lentils for dinner. When we pressed, he said, "People use the dunes like a street. Some bring birds from Brazil or wood from the park. Some bring worse. Sometimes the sea brings packages and hands are waiting, and no one says anything because what can you do? But they do not want you here when they work. They whistle so you turn back." He lifted his eyes to mine. "You should turn back." The rain slackened near dusk. The 4 of us stood by the lighthouse wall, sheltered from the worst of the wind. A small boat, dark against the whitecaps, moved parallel to shore, too near, then vanished behind the point. The whistle came again, nearer, and was answered by a different note, 2 short bursts like a cough. Diego swallowed. "Okay," he said, pretending brightness he didn't feel. "Now I really want a truck." We slept in turns. Around 3, I woke to find Camila's bunk empty and the door ajar, the beaded curtain ticking. I stepped outside into a cold that scraped my teeth. The village was shadow and shape. Gulls nested like crumpled paper on the roofs. Down by the first dune a pale figure moved, stooped, carrying something that flashed in the lighthouse beam. "Camila!" I whispered, but the wind stole her name. The figure paused, head cocked, then straightened and continued inland until the fog ate it. At dawn, we found Camila curled under the back window, wrapped in her coat, eyes open. "I didn't leave," she said before we asked. "I heard steps and someone at the door. I thought it was you." Her cheeks were salted with dried spray, and her hands shook when she poured the mate. Matteo swore quietly. Diego checked the latch, which was intact. Outside, on the plank, lay a wet length of cloth like a strap. I pressed my thumb into it and smelled fuel. The tide had chewed away part of the path to the rocks. Sea lions barked again toward land. We followed their gaze and saw, higher up the slope, a rag fluttering from a low stake. The rag was white, tied with blue twine, the color of the rope. Beneath it someone had drawn the symbols again, but this time the dots weren't a row. They were an arrow pointing toward a shallow gully. Pedro met us at the door with a weathered flare gun. "I was not going to show you this," he said, "but if they come during the day, you fire and point at the sea. That is our history here. We call the prefectura, and sometimes they arrive, and sometimes they don't." His jaw worked, as if chewing unspoken stories. "Do not follow the arrows." We followed the arrows. I wish I could say we didn't, but there's a gravity to mysteries that practical advice cannot cancel. The gully was sand-slick and smelled like old fish. It funneled the wind until it piped into the same thin tone. Halfway along we found a bundle wrapped in dark plastic, tied with knots we didn't recognize. We stared at it like cowards until Diego cut the twine with his pocket knife. Inside lay waterlogged clothes, men's, women's, a child's shirt with a cartoon whale, and a cheap cell phone sealed in a bag. The phone screen had a single message in Portuguese, Sinai's Hoji 19H. "Signals tonight at 7, Matteo translated. The lighthouse beam glided over the dunes like a blind searcher. The sea was full of steel bristles. We carried the phone back and put everything on the table. Pedro looked like he'd swallowed sand. "Sometimes they land people," he said finally. "Not many. Mostly drugs, sometimes birds. But people, too. From the north. They come across in small boats. They wait here. No one sees them, because who wants trouble? The wind takes the sound. The dunes take the footprints. You will tell the police, yes? They will file a paper. And then the wind." At 6:45, the whistle rose. It was close enough that I could feel the note on my teeth. Lights appeared inland, 3 fast, 1 slow, exactly where the poles bend. A second light winked from beyond the breakers, answering, 2 short, 1 long. Diego swore. "We can't pretend this isn't happening." Pedro lifted the flare gun, then lowered it. "If you fire it, they will see you," he said. "And if they see you, they will wait for you later." Camila stood. She took the flare and walked fast toward the lighthouse, shoulders squared as if daring the storm to shoulder back. I followed without deciding. At the stone base, protected from the worst wind, we looked out over the wrinkled water and the shape moving toward the point. "Now," she said. I raised the flare and shot a red flower into the iron sky. Its reflection climbed the wet stone, and for a heartbeat I thought the lighthouse had caught fire. What happened next was not dramatic. The boat's light blinked twice, then went dark. We heard the slap of an engine throttled down, then silence. The inland lights vanished, too. The whistle ceased, as if a mouth had been covered by a hand. For a minute there was nothing but wind and the blood rush in my ears. Then, far down the beach, a second flare went up, green, and a dark vehicle crawled along the waterline, sending fans of spray like wings. Prefectura. By morning, there were tire tracks in places where no tires are allowed, and 2 uniformed men asking careful questions. They took the phone and the plastic bundle. They did not take our names. Pedro watched from behind the beads. When the officers left, he told us to pack. "The trucks will run," he said. "The storm has done what it wanted." As we crossed the dunes, the poles felt closer together, as if the park had shortened the way out. Halfway back we passed last night's gully. The stake was gone, and the arrow erased by a careful heel. On the ridge, a fresh line of symbols had been drawn facing town. Circle with 3 strokes, bisected square, 3 dots. I stepped on them out of anger. The wind smoothed my prints before I'd taken 5 steps. In Barra de Valizas, the kiosk woman sold us hot empanadas and didn't ask about the storm. On the bus, we sat with our packs between our knees and watched the coast unspool. Camila held her sketchbook open on her lap. On the page was the lighthouse, the village, the dunes, and a faint set of marks in the sand, like someone had pressed the graphite with a stick and lifted it. "I didn't draw those," she said. I believed her. Back in Montevideo, the news ran a 4-sentence item about a patrol near Polonio that intercepted an irregular signal possibly related to illegal trafficking. No arrests. No suspects. Pedro never answered the phone number he'd written on the posada receipt. Sometimes, falling asleep, I hear the whistle again, scaled down by distance and memory. It could have been the wind in a rusted pole. It could have been men signaling a small boat and the shore answering, just for a moment, before both sides agreed to pretend they had heard nothing at all.